Some crimes make headlines. Others spark outrage. But then there are cases so shocking, so deeply unsettling, that they leave an entire nation demanding answers. This isn't just another tragic story. It's a case that exposed deep cracks in the system, raised unsettling questions about justice, and left behind a trail of controversy that refuses to fade. What really happened? Who failed to act? And how did a case like this even slip through the cracks? Stay with us, because this is one story you won't forget. On December 24, 2019, in the quiet city of Laconia, New Hampshire, a tragedy unfolded that would forever scar the community. At approximately 3:35 p.m., emergency services received a frantic 911 call from 103 Blueberry Lane, Unit 67. The caller, whose identity remains confidential, reported an unresponsive child, 5-year-old Dennis Boo Vaughn Jr. First responders from the Laconia Police and Fire Departments were dispatched immediately. Upon arrival, the scene was nothing short of harrowing. Young Dennis lay motionless, exhibiting no signs of life. Paramedics initiated life-saving measures before rushing him to a nearby hospital. Despite their valiant efforts, Dennis was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The initial observations raised immediate suspicions. Visible injuries on Dennis's head and neck suggested foul play, prompting law enforcement to treat the residence as a potential crime scene. Inside the modest apartment, officers noted signs of disarray. There were indications of a struggle, with overturned furniture and scattered personal items. The atmosphere was thick with tension as investigators meticulously documented the scene, collecting evidence that would later prove crucial. Family members present during the incident were separated and interviewed to piece together the events leading up to this devastating moment. The community of Laconia, nestled in the heart of New Hampshire, was left in shock. Neighbors described Dennis as a lively and cheerful child, often seen playing outside with his siblings. The sudden and tragic circumstances of his death cast a somber shadow over the festive season. Local news outlets quickly picked up the story, with headlines questioning how such a tragedy could occur in their close-knit community. As the investigation progressed, the focus shifted to the household dynamics. Dennis had been living with his grandmother, Sherry Connor, who had legal custody of him and his siblings. This arrangement was due to challenges faced by Dennis's biological parents. Neighbors reported that while the children appeared well cared for, there were occasional disturbances at the residence. However, none anticipated the darkness that would culminate on that fateful Christmas Eve. The initial response from law enforcement was swift, but as days turned into weeks, the community's demand for answers grew louder. Vigils were held in Dennis's memory, with residents calling for justice and transparency. The tragedy not only highlighted the vulnerabilities of the young, but also underscored the importance of community vigilance and the need for systemic reforms to protect the most innocent among us. Following the tragic death of 5-year-old Dennis Boo Vaughn Jr., the state's medical examiner conducted a comprehensive autopsy to determine the cause of death. The findings were both revealing and disturbing, shedding light on the severity of the injuries sustained by the young boy. The autopsy report concluded that Dennis died from blunt force trauma to the head and neck. Specifically, the medical examiner identified multiple contusions and abrasions consistent with significant physical impact. These injuries were deemed to be the direct cause of death, leading the examiner to classify the manner of death as a homicide. Further examination revealed over 60 abrasions and contusions distributed across Dennis's body. Notably, the majority of these injuries were fresh, indicating they had been inflicted shortly before his death. The pattern and distribution of the injuries suggested a sustained period of physical abuse, rather than a singular accidental event. In addition to the traumatic injuries, the autopsy noted signs of possible neglect. There were indications that Dennis may have suffered from malnutrition, as evidenced by his low body weight and other physiological markers. However, further tests would have been necessary to confirm this condition conclusively. The comprehensive nature of the injuries, combined with the evidence of potential neglect, painted a grim picture of the circumstances leading up to Dennis's death. These findings not only provided crucial evidence for the ensuing criminal investigation, but also highlighted the severity of the abuse Dennis endured in his final days. If you are finding this case as shocking as we did, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth true crime investigations. We bring you the stories that matter, the ones that challenge, disturb, and make you question everything. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the truth, one case at a time. In the aftermath of Dennis "Boo" Vaughn Jr.'s tragic death, the community anticipated swift justice. However, the ensuing investigation was marred by delays and perceived inaction, leading to widespread frustration and calls for accountability. Immediately following Dennis's death, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office announced an investigation, with an autopsy revealing that he died from blunt force trauma to the head. Despite these findings, months passed without any arrests or significant developments in the case. This lack of progress led to growing concerns among family members and the public. Dennis's mother, in her quest for answers, filed a lawsuit against the state's Division for Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, alleging negligence in protecting her son. The lawsuit highlighted systemic issues within the agency, pointing to missed opportunities and failures to intervene despite evident signs of abuse. DCYF maintained that its investigation was adequate, but the case underscored broader concerns about child welfare oversight in New Hampshire. The prolonged silence from law enforcement agencies only intensified public frustration. Community members organized vigils and rallies, demanding transparency and justice for Dennis. Local media outlets featured opinion pieces questioning the efficacy of the investigative process and the apparent lack of urgency in addressing the case. It wasn't until August 2024, nearly 5 years after Dennis's death, that a grand jury indicted his grandmother, Sherry Connor, on charges including manslaughter, first-degree assault, second-degree assault, and witness tampering. This development, while a step toward justice, also highlighted the extensive delays that had plagued the investigation. The protracted timeline of the investigation raised critical questions about the processes and priorities of law enforcement agencies in New Hampshire. Analysts and child welfare advocates called for comprehensive reviews to identify and address the systemic issues that contributed to the delays, emphasizing the need for timely interventions in cases involving vulnerable children. The tragic death of 5-year-old Dennis "Boo" Vaughn Jr. on Christmas Eve 2019 left the community in shock and mourning. For years, the case remained unresolved, with no arrests made, leaving many to wonder if justice would ever be served. However, in August 2024, a significant development occurred. Dennis's grandmother, 61-year-old Sherry Connor, was indicted on multiple charges related to his death. This chapter delves into the events and evidence that finally led to her indictment and the ensuing public outrage. In the years following Dennis's death, the investigation seemed to stall. The lack of information and apparent inaction from authorities led to growing frustration within the community. Residents questioned why no one had been held accountable for the death of an innocent child. Behind the scenes, however, law enforcement continued their work. The turning point came when a Belknap County grand jury returned indictments against Sherry Connor. She was charged with manslaughter for recklessly causing Dennis's death, negligent homicide, 6 counts of first-degree assault, second-degree assault, and 4 counts of witness tampering. The key evidence that led to these charges included witness testimonies and forensic examinations. According to Belknap County Attorney Keith Cormier, interviews with witnesses and forensic evidence painted a horrific picture of life under Connor's care, leading up to December 24, 2019. It was alleged that Connor's treatment of her grandchildren could aptly be described as torture. The indictment detailed multiple instances of abuse. Connor was accused of subjecting Dennis and his siblings to severe physical punishment, including beatings and other forms of mistreatment. The witness tampering charges suggested that Connor attempted to influence or intimidate individuals to prevent them from providing evidence against her. The public reaction to Connor's indictment was swift and intense. Many in the community were outraged that it had taken nearly 5 years for charges to be filed. The delay in justice led to protests and demands for accountability from law enforcement and child protective services. In response to the public outcry, authorities emphasized the complexity of the case. They cited the need for thorough investigations to ensure that all evidence was properly collected and that the charges would hold up in court. Despite these explanations, the community's trust had been deeply shaken. As the legal proceedings against Sherry Connor moved forward, the community remained vigilant, determined to see justice served for Dennis "Boo" Vaughn Jr., the case highlighted significant concerns about the protection of vulnerable children and the responsibilities of those entrusted with their care. The indictment of Sherry Connor was a pivotal moment in the quest for justice for Dennis. It underscored the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity and the collective demand for accountability. As the trial approached, the community hoped that the legal process would bring closure to a painful chapter and serve as a catalyst for meaningful change in child protection policies. The story of Dennis Boo Vaughn Jr. serves as a somber reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by children and the critical need for vigilance in safeguarding their well-being. The community's unwavering commitment to seeking justice reflects a broader societal imperative to protect the most innocent among us. In the pursuit of justice for young Dennis Boo Vaughn Jr., the legal proceedings have been both intricate and contentious. The case has garnered significant attention in Laconia, New Hampshire, and beyond, as the community seeks answers and accountability. The charges and legal framework. Sherry Connor, the grandmother of Dennis Vaughn Jr., faces multiple serious charges in connection with his death. These include manslaughter, negligent homicide, several counts of first-degree assault, second-degree assault, and witness tampering. The gravity of these charges underscores the severity of the allegations and the legal system's commitment to addressing them comprehensively. Prosecution's stance. The prosecution has built its case on a foundation of witness testimonies and forensic evidence. They allege that Connor subjected her grandson to prolonged abuse, culminating in the fatal injuries he sustained. The state's medical examiner concluded that Dennis died from blunt force trauma to the head and neck, classifying his death as a homicide. Prosecutors argue that the evidence points directly to Connor's culpability in these tragic events. Defense's strategy. In contrast, the defense has challenged the prosecution's narrative, emphasizing the presumption of innocence and the need for a fair trial. They have highlighted the nearly 5-year gap between Dennis's death and Connor's arrest, suggesting that this delay indicates a lack of compelling evidence. Defense attorney Emily Wines has argued that the state's prolonged investigation undermines claims of Connor being a danger to the community, advocating for her release on bail as the legal process unfolds. Bail hearings and judicial decisions. The question of bail has been a focal point in the pretrial proceedings. In August 2024, during a hearing at Belknap County Superior Court, the prosecution contended that the severity of the charges warranted Connor's continued detention, citing her as a potential danger to herself and others. The defense countered, proposing that Connor could be released under conditions that would mitigate any perceived risks. Ultimately, Judge Marcatori denied bail, resulting in Connor remaining in custody as she awaits trial. Anticipated trial and community impact. The trial is scheduled to commence in May 2025, with jury selection set for the 19th. As the date approaches, both legal teams are preparing to present their cases, each aiming to sway the jury through compelling arguments and evidence. The community of Laconia remains deeply affected by Dennis's death, with many residents expressing a desire for justice and systemic changes to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The legal battle over the death of Dennis Boo Vaughn Jr. encapsulates complex issues of justice, accountability, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. As the trial unfolds, it will not only determine the fate of Sherry Connor, but also serve as a reflection of the community's values and the legal system's capacity to address such profound tragedies. The tragic death of 5-year-old Dennis Boo Vaughn has elicited profound reactions from the local community and beyond. The circumstances surrounding his passing have ignited widespread outrage, leading to calls for justice and potential reforms in child protection legislation across the United States. Community outrage and mobilization. In the aftermath of Dennis's death, the Laconia community was engulfed in grief and anger. Residents, many of whom had no personal connection to Dennis or his family, felt a deep sense of loss and betrayal. The fact that such a tragedy could occur within their community spurred many into action. Vigils were organized to honor Dennis's memory, with participants holding candles and sharing stories to commemorate his short life. These gatherings served as both a tribute and a platform for expressing collective grief. Beyond vigils, community members took proactive steps to raise awareness about the case. Signs and posters bearing Dennis's image and messages seeking justice were displayed throughout Laconia. This grassroots effort aimed to keep the case in the public eye and pressure authorities to act decisively. Controversy surrounding the case. The case became a focal point of controversy due to perceived delays and shortcomings in the investigation. Many community members expressed frustration over the time it took for significant developments to occur, especially given the severity of the allegations. The arrest of Dennis's grandmother, Sherry Connor, on charges related to his death, further fueled public discourse. Details that emerged during court proceedings painted a harrowing picture of the abuse Dennis allegedly suffered. These revelations intensified public scrutiny of the systems in place meant to protect vulnerable children. Impact on child protection laws. The tragedy of Dennis Vaughn has prompted a broader conversation about child protection laws in the United States. Advocates argue that existing legislation may have gaps that allow for such tragedies to occur. The case has become a catalyst for discussions on potential reforms aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Proposed changes include stricter oversight of guardians and more rigorous background checks for individuals assuming custodial roles. There's also a push for enhanced training for child welfare professionals to better identify and respond to signs of abuse. This is my final say. The death of Dennis "Boo" Vaughn has left an indelible mark on the Laconia community and has resonated nationwide. The public's demand for justice and the ensuing controversy have highlighted potential deficiencies in child protection mechanisms. As the case progresses, it serves as a poignant reminder of the need for vigilance and reform to safeguard the most vulnerable members of society.